You know, one of the most common questions I'm asked, why do people come on your shows and sell their family medals? And you know, when I first started, I thought I would never sell mine. Since then, I've come to an understanding of, under certain circumstances, why it's right. If you've got a collection of medals that are sitting in a drawer, the story is lost. It's not being told. But when a medal buyer buys them, those medal researchers go into who he was or who she was, what they did, how they did it, where they were. The story somehow lives on, and they put the photographs that they can get with the medals, and that story will never be lost if the medals are owned by a medal collector.
Hello and welcome to Bamford's. Thank you all for attending and everybody online. So to start the sale, lot 5,000, the Queen South African medal, and I've got £70 on the sale room, 70, 75, 75, 80, at £85 on Bamford's Live looking for 90. Any further bids at £85.
My grandfather, James Graham Dobbs, was in the Royal Navy just before the Second World War and during the Second World War. He spent most of his time on two ships, HMS King George V and HMS Royal Sovereign. We've got here the medals, his medals, and it says, well, it's the 1939-45 Star. We have the Atlantic Star. We have the Africa Star. We have the Italy Star and the Burma Star. The stories that he used to tell me when I was a boy were mainly around the Arctic convoys. Going from northern Scotland, and they would go up all the way round to Murmansk, the Russian convoys. Churchill said it was the worst journey in history. So the convoys were ships that were carrying food and supplies from Britain, from mainland Europe, all the way round to Russia. Those were the days when the Russians were our friends. They were fighting the Germans from the other side. And keeping the Russians fed was vital, because as long as the Russians were keeping the Germans busy on that side, we would have a good chance of fighting the Germans from our side. So those Arctic convoys were vital. Not only were they fighting the incredible winter storms, if you touched your hand on a bit of metal, and my granddad did this just before one of the guns went off, he touched his hand on a metal railing and his hand stuck to it, and he couldn't get it off in time just before the guns fired, and he was deaf when I knew him. That one incident. But they were fighting the snow, they were fighting the ice, they were fighting the weather, but they were also fighting the German U-boats.
Lot number 5065. This is the World War II Third Reich U-boot. The badge, £200 to start on Easy Live. 220 on the sale room, 220, 240, 240, 260, 260, 280, 280, 300, 320, 350 on Easy Live. Any further bids at 320. 3066.
In terms of value, these are worth very little. They are worth more to me than to anybody else ever. But if they were to come up for sale, they're probably worth £150 to £200, something like that, because they're quite a long set. He was in the Navy for a long time. The sad thing about these is the Second World War was the only conflict in British history where the government decided that they wouldn't name the medals. So if you go to a house contents and you find First World War medals, you look along the edge and it will say Gunner so-and-so, 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 and with the number at the end of the name as well. So you can do all of that research. Here, with these medals, none of them are named. None of them. So Second World War, if you don't keep that information with them, the story's lost. I do think that if you're going to keep your medals in a drawer and you're not going to do that research yourself, or maybe you can't do it and don't have the tools to do it, then I don't think it's a bad thing to give them to somebody who will do that work, to allow the story to move on.
At £60, gavels raised at 60.
So as you can probably imagine, I'm not going to sell my grandfather's medals. I mean, luckily I'm a historian. I love to be able to do that bit of research. I've got all those photographs, and what hopefully I will do is frame the medals with a few photographs, and then put a story, his story, somehow behind the medals and also on the back of the frame, so that that story lives on. Now, people say life is full of coincidences. I've always wanted to retire to Scotland, and I've always loved the West Coast, the northern West Coast. It's where my ancestors are from. It's where my family, natural family roots are from. And I found a cottage for sale, eventually for my retirement. That cottage is just outside Poole U, and Poole U was where the Murmansk convoys were based. Now, at the time, I didn't know. I didn't know my grandfather was there. I looked at the cottage, fell in love with it. It's a 2 up, 2 down, derelict fisherman's cottage at the moment. But I drove to the end of the peninsula, and at the end of the peninsula was a barracks, and there was a sign, and that sign said, "This is the base of the World War II Russian convoys." And it was where the Pioneer Brigade and the engineers were based, to make sure that all of the infrastructure on land was there to support the Navy as they gathered with the trade ships, with those ships carrying grain and food and supplies for Russia. When all those ships were there gathering in the harbour just outside Poole U, my grandfather would have been there. And now I've got a house that looks out over the sea where his ship would have been moored, waiting to go to Russia. And I have to say, as my mum would say, it was written. These photographs and these medals will come up with me, and they will be hanging on the wall in my little cottage in Scotland, and they will be back where he was 80 years ago.